Welcome back, everybody. We're diving into a really interesting Australian murder case today from 1994, based on a true crime podcast episode that we found.
Oh, cool.
This one is
Yeah.
full of twists and turns, and it raises a lot of questions about
Yeah.
about how the justice system works, really.
Right.
The case is about Anna Jane Cheney, a young lawyer
Hmm.
found dead in her bathtub.
Oh, wow.
At first, everyone thought it was an accident, like she slipped and fell. But then her fiancé, Henry Keogh, he became the prime suspect.
Okay. I see. What makes this case so interesting?
Well, it's like, everything's not always what it seems.
Oh, okay.
You have this couple that seems happy, but there are all these secrets,
Sure.
and the evidence is really confusing.
Right.
In the end, we're not even sure if justice was really served.
Wow. Okay.
So we're going to look at what happened on March 18th, 1994, the day Anna Jane died.
Okay.
We'll follow the whole investigation from the beginning. Look at the evidence they found.
Yeah.
Talk about the trials. And then all this crazy stuff comes out years later. It's like, whoa, what's going on here?
Yeah.
It goes from an accident to murder, then he's free.
Right.
But there's a lot of controversy around it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, first, Henry Keogh. He's the one who found Anna Jane in the bathtub. He called for help, right? At first, it seemed like a horrible accident. Maybe she slipped and fell. They had had what seemed like a normal evening together, dinner, drinks, even met with Henry's sister-in-law.
Okay. Yeah.
But then the police noticed some things didn't add up.
Really? Like what?
In Henry's story, the things he told them just weren't consistent.
Ah.
Plus, Anna Jane's family had some concerns about Henry. Their relationship was a bit strained,
Okay. What were they concerned about?
Well, for one, they didn't like his past.
Okay.
They were worried about his money problems,
Oh, right.
and they were iffy about his previous marriage.
So there's some baggage there. Makes sense.
Imagine losing someone you love like that,
Yeah.
and then having doubts about the person who was supposed to care for them. It's like grieving and questioning everything at the same time.
Yeah. Tough situation.
And it gets even more complicated. Anna Jane had a life insurance policy, $400,000. And guess who was the beneficiary? Henry.
Wow. Really? Okay. So now we've got some red flags popping up.
Yeah, right. The police and Anna Jane's friends and family, everyone starts getting suspicious. It's not looking like a simple accident anymore. So what did the autopsy say?
Right. So the first autopsy, it was done by Dr. Colin Manick.
Oh, okay.
He was a well-known forensic pathologist, but even he couldn't say for sure if she drowned.
Oh.
He found bruises on her forehead and neck, couldn't explain them.
Oh, that's not good.
No. And then there were these similarities to those brides in the bath murders from way back.
Rides in the bath. That sounds creepy.
Yeah, it's a pretty dark part of history. Back in the early 1900s, husbands would drown their wives in bathtubs to get the insurance money and make it look like an accident.
Oh, wow. That's awful.
Yeah, it was a whole thing back then.
Jeez. So they thought maybe that's what happened here.
Yeah, Dr. Manick thought so. And then it gets even weirder. In the second autopsy, he finds what looks like handprints, bruises on Anna Jane's legs.
Handprints. Like someone held her down.
That's what he thought. He called it the grip theory, like someone held her ankles underwater.
Wow, that completely changes things. It goes from a possible accident to, like, a possible murder.
Exactly. That grip theory, that really changed the whole investigation.
Did the prosecution use that to build their case against Henry?
Yeah, it was a big part of it. But, as we'll see later, all of this evidence from Dr. Manick, it ends up being really controversial. But yeah, they focused on the bruising, and they started looking into Henry's life even more.
Oh, okay. So what did they find? What was he hiding?
Well, it turns out Henry wasn't exactly a saint. The police found out about his affairs. While he was engaged to Anna Jane, he had a thing with Belinda Morris and another with Monica Coleman.
Okay, so not just one affair.
No, multiple affairs. Which doesn't really match up with him saying he was deeply in love with Anna Jane.
Yeah, that's some serious deception.
And remember that life insurance policy? Well, there were actually 4 more, totaling over $1 million. All with Henry as the beneficiary.
5 life insurance policies.
Yeah.
Over $1 million. That is not looking good for Henry.
Right. And then they found out he was in deep with money problems, supporting his ex-wife and kids. $1 million would solve all his problems.
Okay, so we've got inconsistencies in his statements. The family doesn't trust him. There's unexplained bruising, a history of affairs, and now a huge financial motive.
Yeah, it's starting to look pretty bad for him.
Right. But then they found something even more incriminating. Henry forged Anna Jane's signature on all 5 of those life insurance policies.
He forged her signature. Wow, that's pretty damning.
Yeah, so motive, suspicious bruising, and fraud. It's pretty clear why he was the prime suspect.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So they went to trial. The prosecution focused on that grip theory, the bruising on her legs. Dr. Manick even showed the jury how he thought the drowning happened.
It sounds like they were putting on a show for the jury, trying to make it as real as possible.
Right. But the defense, they argued that it was all just circumstantial. They said the bruising could have been from anything. And they had their own expert witnesses who disagreed with Dr. Manick.
So it was like a battle of the experts.
Yeah, totally. Each side had their own story.
What did the jury think?
Well, the first trial, hung jury, couldn't agree on a verdict.
So some of them weren't convinced.
Right. But the prosecution didn't give up.
They tried again?
Yeah, second trial.
Guilty.
Murder. 25 years in prison.
Wow. Okay, so even with the first trial being inconclusive, they got him in the second one.
Yeah, they did.
Seems like that's the end of the story.
Yeah, you would think, right? But there's a whole lot more to this case. Trust me.
Oh, this is where it gets really interesting. I can't wait to hear what happens next.
Let's just say, sometimes truth is stranger than fiction. Remember how Henry was convicted? Well, it turns out that might have been a bit premature. There was another investigation going on at the same time, a coronial inquest into the deaths of 3 infants.
A coronial inquest? That sounds serious. What exactly is that, and how is it connected to Anna Jane's case?
So a coronial inquest in Australia, it's a legal process. They look into sudden deaths, unexpected deaths, try to figure out what happened, why it happened. And this particular inquest, well, it involved Dr. Colin Manick.
The same pathologist who did Anna Jane's autopsy.
Exactly. He was involved in those infant death cases, too.
Okay, so now we're talking about the same expert, whose testimony helped put Henry away. And now there are questions about his work in other cases.
Right. And the findings of the inquest, they weren't good. The coroner found problems with Dr. Manick's autopsies on those infants. He missed important stuff, reached the wrong conclusions about why they died. His whole approach was questionable.
So are we saying that the expert who helped convict Henry might have been incompetent? That changes things.
That's exactly what people started wondering. If he messed up those infant cases, could he have messed up Anna Jane's case, too?
Right. Because the grip theory, the bruising on her legs, all that was based on what Dr. Manick said.
Exactly. So to figure things out, they brought in another expert, Professor Tony Thomas, to look over Anna Jane's autopsy.
Professor Thomas?
He had already criticized Dr. Manick's work in those infant cases.
Oh, okay. So not a fan then.
Not really. He was worried about people being wrongly convicted because of bad forensic evidence. So he looked into Anna Jane's case really carefully.
What did he find?
Well, it was pretty shocking, to be honest. He found all sorts of problems with what Dr. Manick did. He didn't even ask for her medical records, which could have shown if she had any health issues that might explain the bruising.
Oh, wow. That seems like a basic step.
Right. And the tissue samples he took, not good enough. His notes were incomplete. Photos from the autopsy, missing important angles. Basically, Professor Thomas said the whole autopsy was just bad. Not even close to what a competent forensic investigation should be.
That's a lot of mistakes, especially for a top expert. And this is the evidence they used to send a man to prison. But what about that thumbprint bruise on her leg? That was key evidence, right?
That's where it gets really interesting, Professor Thomas. He looked at the tissue sample from that bruise, and guess what? No evidence of a bruise.
Hold on. So the bruise that was so important to the prosecution's case, the bruise that Dr. Manick used to say to her was a struggle, maybe it wasn't even a bruise.
Exactly. And think about it. No one actually saw Anna Jane's legs before she was found in the tub. So we don't even know for sure when those marks appeared.
This is crazy. We're talking about possibly sending someone to prison for murder? Based on evidence that might be totally wrong. What did people think about all this?
Oh, it was a huge deal. People were furious. The media was all over it. They wanted a full investigation into Dr. Manick's work, and they wanted to know if Henry Keogh's conviction was even valid.
I bet the media loved this story.
Oh, yeah. Journalists, TV shows, everyone was talking about it. Public pressure was really building to take a closer look at Dr. Manick and what happened with Henry.
So the whole case against Henry was falling apart. Did they do anything right away to review his conviction?
It took a while. Henry kept fighting for his freedom, and his supporters, they didn't give up either. This guy, Dr. Robert Moles, he's a legal expert. He specializes in miscarriages of justice. He got involved and found even more problems with the case.
Dr. Moles, what did he find?
So one thing he found was that Dr. Manick was using outdated information. Like, he relied on old science to explain some of his findings, things that were no longer considered accurate.
So not only were his methods bad, but the science he was using was outdated too.
Yeah, exactly. They even did a reenactment of that drowning scenario, the one Dr. Manick described, the grip theory, where someone holds Anna Jane underwater.
A reenactment. They actually tried to do it.
Yeah, to see if it was even possible.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And what happened?
It was practically impossible to do what Dr. Manick said. It just didn't make sense when they tried it out.
So they were basically proving him wrong through a real-life experiment. That must have had a big impact.
Oh, yeah, it did. With all this new evidence and all the problems with Dr. Manick's work, the medical board finally had to step in and take a look.
They had to review what he did, right?
Exactly. And what they found was really significant.
So what did they say about Dr. Manick's work?
They said his autopsy on Anna Jane was incompetent. But here's the strange part. They didn't say he was guilty of unprofessional conduct.
Wait, what? How can someone be incompetent but not unprofessional? It seems like the same thing.
It is a bit confusing, but the bottom line is that his work on the Cheney case, it was officially considered bad. And it gets worse. Do you remember his colleague, Dr. Ross James? He also testified at Henry's trials.
Yeah, I remember him.
Well, they found him guilty of unprofessional conduct.
What did he do?
He admitted that he looked at those tissue samples from Anna Jane's leg, the thumbprint bruise, and he found nothing. No evidence of a bruise. But guess what? He didn't tell anyone during the trial.
He knew the evidence didn't match up, but kept quiet. That's unbelievable.
It is. So now we have two doctors involved in this murder trial. Both of their credibility is shot. One is incompetent, the other hid important evidence. This case really makes you think about whether the system is working properly.
Right. It's not just about one man's guilt anymore. It's about the evidence and whether it can be trusted.
Exactly. This case shows how important it is to have good investigations, real science, and people who are held accountable. It's also about the media and people speaking out and making sure these things come to light.
So with all this new information, what happened to Henry? Did they let him go?
It was a long road, but yes, eventually. It all started with a hidden report. Another forensic expert, Professor Barry Vernon Roberts, the government asked him to look at the case years ago. But his report, it was buried.
Hidden? Why would they do that?
That's the crazy part. This report, it basically said the prosecution's case was wrong. Professor Roberts said there was no evidence to support that grip theory. He thought Anna Jane probably had a heart problem and then drowned accidentally.
Wow. So they had a report from their own expert. That contradicted everything, and they hid it. That's insane.
It is. So with this new report and all the problems with the other evidence, Henry's lawyers appealed again.
This had to be a huge moment for Henry after all this time.
It was. The appeals court saw all the problems. They overturned his conviction. After 20 years in prison, Henry Keogh was finally free, at least on bail, while they figured out what to do next.
It must have been such a relief for him.
Imagine that. Finally free after all those years. But he still wasn't officially innocent. They could still try him again.
So what do? Do they try him again?
Well, they tried to, but there's a big problem. Dr. Manick, he was sick. He couldn't testify.
Without their key witness? Could they even go to trial?
They didn't think so. It was too risky. They knew everyone was watching them, so they dropped the charges.
Wow. After 21 years, it was finally over. He was free. But is it really over? We still don't know for sure how Anna Jane died.
That's the thing about this case. It leaves you with so many questions.
Okay, so they found this hidden report. A bombshell, you said. What was in it?
Well, this report, it basically said everything the prosecution used against Henry was wrong. Professor Roberts, the expert who wrote it, he said there was no evidence to support that whole grip theory at all.
Wow. So the prosecution's whole case was basically debunked by their own expert.
Pretty much. Professor Roberts thought Anna Jane probably had some kind of heart problem, and then she drowned accidentally.
So they had this report the whole time and hid it.
Yeah.
That's messed up.
It is. So Henry's lawyers, they had this new report, plus all the other problems with the evidence. They went back to court, appealed again.
This must have been it for Henry, right? The moment he'd been waiting for.
It was a huge moment. The appeals court, they looked at everything, and they overturned his conviction.
So after 20 years, he was finally free.
Well, they let him out on bail, while they figured out if they were going to have another trial.
So he was out of prison, but still not in the clear.
Yeah, exactly. There was still a chance they could try to convict him again.
Wow. So what happened? Did they have another trial?
They wanted to, but then they ran into a problem. Dr. Minock, remember him? He got sick, couldn't testify.
So the prosecution was stuck. They couldn't use their main guy anymore.
Nope. And with all the stuff that had come out about him, his bad work, the hidden report, they knew it was going to be really hard to win, and everyone was watching them, you know?
Yeah. They had to be careful.
Right. So in the end, they gave up. They dropped all the charges against Henry.
So after 21 years, it was finally really over.
It was.
But even though he's free, we still don't really know what happened to Anna Jane, do we?
That's the thing about this case. It leaves you with a lot of questions.
What stands out to you most about this whole thing?
Well, it really makes you think about the justice system, right? And
Yeah.
how things can go wrong.
Yeah. It shows how important it is to get things right. The evidence, the experts, everything.
Exactly. Because people's lives are at stake.
This was definitely a deep dive. It's a story that makes you think about truth and justice and how complicated it all can be.
Yeah, it's a reminder that things aren't always what they seem.
If you want to learn more about this case, you can search for Henry Keogh or Anna Jane Cheney online. There are news articles, documentaries, even forums where people are still talking about it.
It's a case that stays with you.
It does. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time for another one.